The empty lecture hall, Schopenhauer's resentment, Hegel's dominance, and an unresolved dispute. This is what Schopenhauer has to say regarding Hegel's philosophy. But the height of audacity in serving up pure nonsense, in stringing together senseless and extravagant mazes of words, such as had previously been known only in madhouses, was finally reached in Hegel, and will remain as a monument to German stupidity. If I were to say that the so-called philosophy of this fellow Hegel is a colossal piece of mystification which will yet provide posterity with an inexhaustible theme for laughter at our times, that it is a pseudo-philosophy paralysing all mental powers, stifling all real thinking, and, by the most outrageous misuse of language, putting in its place the hollowest, most senseless, thoughtless, and, as is confirmed by its success, most stupefying verbiage, I should be quite right. End of quotation. In the summer of 1820, a 32-year-old Arthur Schopenhauer arrived at the University of Berlin with a plan. He would give a lecture course with the grandiose title, Universal Philosophy. But this was not a humble beginning. Schopenhauer insisted that his lectures be scheduled at the exact same hour as those of G.W.F. Hegel, the university's chair of philosophy and the most famous philosopher in the German-speaking world. The result was humiliating. Hundreds of students packed Hegel's hall. 5 students registered for Schopenhauer's course. The following semester, Schopenhauer attracted exactly 0 students. His lectures were cancelled. His brief academic career was over. This legendary clash is often told as a story of personal ego and bad blood. Schopenhauer called Hegel a mindless charlatan. He described Hegel's work as pseudo-philosophy designed to destroy minds. He wrote insults into the margins of his personal copy of Hegel's writings. Hegel, by contrast, met Schopenhauer only once, took no notice of him, and never bothered to respond in print. But the clash was never merely personal. It was philosophical, and it was historical. Schopenhauer did not lose simply because Hegel was a better self-promoter. He lost because German idealism was the dominant philosophy of his age, and Hegel stood at its summit. Schopenhauer's own philosophy, drawn from Plato, Kant, and ancient Indian thought, had no audience yet. The taste for his kind of thinking would have to wait for later generations, and even then, Hegel never disappeared. Both philosophers remain relevant today, not because one defeated the other, but because their disagreement cuts to the heart of questions that philosophy cannot close. Is history meaningful? Does time reveal truth? Is progress real or an illusion? 1. The common father. Kant and the 2 inheritances. Both Hegel and Schopenhauer began as followers of Immanuel Kant, but they read Kant in opposite directions. Kant had argued that we can never know the world as it is in itself. Our senses provide raw data, but our minds impose categories, space, time, causality, to organize that data into coherent experience. Science is possible because we all share these same mental categories. But the thing in itself, the world as it exists independently of our perception, remains forever hidden. This was a revolutionary move. Kant had limited human knowledge to the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us. The noumenal world, the world as it truly is, was off limits. Hegel looked at Kant's system and said, "Not good enough. If reason can uncover the categories that structure experience, then reason can also uncover the rational structure of reality itself." Hegel rejected the thing in itself as a meaningless abstraction. There is no hidden world behind appearances. The rationale is the real, and the real is rational. Therefore, history, the unfolding of human consciousness through time, is the gradual self-revelation of truth. The Absolute Spirit comes to know itself through the historical journey of humanity. Schopenhauer looked at Kant's system and said, "Hegel missed everything that matters. For Schopenhauer, Kant was right about one thing: the phenomenal world is constructed by our mental categories. But the thing in itself is not unknowable. It can be known, not through abstract reasoning, but through immediate, bodily experience. Each of us has direct access to the thing in itself from the inside. That inside is the will. The will, for Schopenhauer, is a blind, irrational, ceaseless striving. It has no goal. It seeks no final satisfaction. It simply drives. Hunger, thirst, sexual desire, ambition, fear, longing. All of these are expressions of the same underlying will. The entire phenomenal world, including our own bodies, is the appearance of this single, universal will. We are not rational animals slowly perfecting ourselves through history. We are puppets of a blind force that uses us for its own endless striving. From this single difference, Hegel's identification of the real with the rationale versus Schopenhauer's identification of the real with the blind will, everything else followed. 2. Hegel's grand narrative, history as the unfolding of truth. Hegel's philosophy of history is, on its surface, magnificent. He proposed that human culture and ideas develop over time, not just in individuals or groups, but in the species as a whole, following a predictable pattern. The unfolding of the truth, he wrote, is revealed in world history. This required Hegel to retell all of human history as a single story of growth and development. He described Indian, Chinese, Greek, and Roman civilizations in painstaking detail. But every description served a single purpose: to show that their singular path of improvement led inevitably to modern European civilization. The Age of Enlightenment, for Hegel, was the point at which humanity could finally comprehend its own long journey and enjoy its maturity and self-consciousness. What is rational is actual, Hegel declared, and what is actual is rational. This statement sounds apparently outrageous to modern ears. Wars, genocides, slavery, exploitation. Are these rational? Hegel's answer was yes, in the sense that they were necessary stages in the self-realization of absolute spirit. The bloodshed of the past is justified by the glorious future it makes possible. Europe, for Hegel, was the absolute end of history. This was praise. To his contemporaries in the 1820s, this vision was intoxicating. After the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars, Hegel offered a story of inevitable progress. The world was becoming better, more rational, more free, and the proof was standing right in front of them: modern European civilization, with its science, its philosophy, its constitutional states. Hegel's lectures drew hundreds of students because he told them what they wanted to hear. History was on their side, but there were problems for some who didn't dig deep into his philosophy. According to critics, Hegel's world history left out Africa and the Americas entirely. His theodicy seemed to justify any violence and bloodshed of the past as necessary for progress. But another problem bothered his contemporaries even earlier. Hegel's optimistic story of unbroken growth likened human development to the growth of a body, culminating in a final, mature form. If Europe is the absolute end of history, what comes next? 3. Schopenhauer's counter-history, the unreality of time. Schopenhauer took Kant's lesson in exactly the opposite direction. If our understanding of the world is structured by mental categories, then those categories are precisely what prevent us from seeing reality as it is. The thing in itself stands apart from space and time. And of all the categories, Schopenhauer thought, time is the most deceptive. The truly real, he wrote, is independent of time, and hence is one and the same in every point of time. This is the direct negation of Hegel's entire project. For Hegel, truth unfolds in time. For Schopenhauer, truth is what lies outside time. History, therefore, cannot teach us anything fundamental about reality. It can only show us the same blind will expressing itself in different costumes. The cruelty of ancient Rome and the cruelty of modern Europe are not separated by moral progress. They are the same thing wearing different clothes. Schopenhauer wrote, "The true philosophy of history consists in the insight that, in spite of all the endless changes and their chaos and confusion, we yet always have before us only the same, identical, unchangeable essence, acting in the same way today as it did yesterday, and always." This is not a belief that things are getting worse. That would be just as foolish as believing they are getting better. Schopenhauer simply rejected the entire framework of historical progress as an illusion generated by the structure of our minds. We are born, we strive, we suffer, we die. That was true in ancient Greece. It is true today. It will be true in 1,000 years. No amount of technology or political reform will change the fundamental character of existence. Pessimism, for Schopenhauer, is not the belief that things are terrible. It is the recognition that things cannot be fundamentally otherwise. And that recognition, he believed, is liberating. Optimism, Hegel's optimism, demands that we see our lives as projects, with achievement and happiness as reasonable goals. When we fail to achieve them, we blame ourselves. Pessimism liberates us from this narrative. It does not ensure happiness, but it relieves us of the unhappiness that optimism unwittingly generates. 4. Why Hegel won the battle. During their lifetimes, German idealism as the house style. All of this raises a question. If Schopenhauer's philosophy was so powerful, why did no one attend his lectures? The answer is not that Hegel was a better philosopher. The answer is that German idealism was the dominant philosophical movement of the era, and Hegel was its most impressive representative. From Fichte to Schelling to Hegel, German idealism had been building a grand systematic philosophy of the absolute. It was rationalist, it was progressive, it was Christian in structure, if not always in content. It promised to unify science, art, religion, and philosophy into a single rational system. Schopenhauer did not belong to this tradition. His sources were different. He drew from Plato's theory of forms, Kant's thing in itself, and the ancient Indian scriptures, the Upanishads, which had recently become available in European translation. He was one of the first Western philosophers to take Indian philosophy seriously. But in the 1820s, this was not a recommendation. It was eccentricity. Moreover, Schopenhauer's style was wrong for his time. Hegel wrote dense, technical, sometimes deliberately obscure prose. But that was the house style of German philosophy. Schopenhauer wrote clear, elegant, sometimes angry German. He insulted his rivals by name. He told stories. He used metaphors. This made him readable, but it also made him seem unserious compared to the professor's building systems. Schopenhauer's moment had not yet arrived. The early 19th century was still optimistic. Industrialization was transforming Europe. Science was advancing. Liberalism was spreading. The mood of the age favored Hegel's story of progress. Schopenhauer's pessimism seemed like the whining of a bitter man who could not get a job. And to some extent, he was bitter. The empty lecture hall haunted him. He spent decades nursing his resentment. But resentment, in philosophy, is not always blindness. Sometimes it is patience. Schopenhauer was convinced that posterity would understand him even if his contemporaries did not. And to a significant extent, he was right. But posterity never forgot Hegel either. 5. Delayed recognition. Schopenhauer's rise and Hegel's enduring presence. After Hegel's death in 1831, his reputation began a slow decline. The grand system that had seemed unassailable began to crack. Young philosophers, especially the so-called young Hegelians, turned his dialectical method against his own conclusions. Marx, Kierkegaard, Feuerbach, all were Hegelians who broke with Hegel. They kept his method but rejected his optimism. Meanwhile, Schopenhauer's fortunes slowly rose. The later decades of the 19th century saw a growing audience for pessimism. The failures of the 1848 revolutions, the rise of industrial alienation, the collapse of traditional religious faith, all of these made Schopenhauer's dark vision more plausible. His major work, The World as Will and Representation, went through multiple editions. By the time of his death in 1860, he was famous. Not as famous as he wanted, perhaps, but famous nonetheless. The late 19th century also saw a remarkable shift in intellectual fashion. Nietzsche discovered Schopenhauer as a young student and was electrified. Though Nietzsche later broke with Schopenhauer's resignation, he never abandoned the fundamental insight that life is driven by non-rational forces. Wagner, the composer, became a devoted Schopenhauerian. Thomas Mann, the novelist, carried Schopenhauer's ideas into the 20th century. Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, acknowledged his debt to Schopenhauer's theory of the unconscious. But Hegel never disappeared. Marx's historical materialism is unthinkable without Hegel's philosophy of history. The entire tradition of critical theory, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Habermas, is a dialogue with Hegel. Phenomenology and existentialism, though often hostile to Hegel's system, developed in reaction to him. Even today, political philosophers return to Hegel's theory of recognition, his analysis of civil society, and his account of freedom. Hegel remains a living presence in continental philosophy, political theory, and the philosophy of history. So it is not accurate to say that Schopenhauer won. It is more accurate to say that both philosophers outlived their immediate moment, and both continue to speak to different human moods. When history seems to be progressing, when science advances, when democracy spreads, when peace holds, Hegel seems wise. When history seems to be repeating itself, when war returns, when injustice persists, when suffering feels pointless, Schopenhauer seems honest. 6. The unresolved dispute. Progress or pessimism? The Schopenhauer-Hegel dispute is not a case of one philosopher being correct and the other mistaken. It is a dispute about the fundamental character of existence and the meaning of time. And it is a dispute that philosophy cannot definitively resolve because it rests on temperament as much as argument. Hegel was right that human beings create meaning through history. We do build institutions. We do develop science. We do expand moral concern over time. Slavery was once universal. Now it is nearly universally condemned. That is progress. Women could not vote in Hegel's time. They can now in most countries. That is progress. Medical knowledge has advanced enormously. That is progress. To deny these facts is to be willfully blind. But Schopenhauer was right that suffering does not disappear with progress. The slave who suffers in 1820 is not consoled by the knowledge that slavery will be abolished in 1865. The child who starves today is not helped by the fact that future generations will have more food. Progress is real, but it is not redemption. Hegel's system too easily sacrificed actual living beings to the altar of the future. Schopenhauer refused to make that sacrifice. Moreover, Schopenhauer was right to question whether progress in material conditions translates into progress in human happiness. We have more comfort than any previous generation. Do we have more peace of mind? The evidence is mixed at best. Anxiety and depression are not less common in wealthy societies. The blind will, Schopenhauer would say, simply finds new objects for its striving. It is never satisfied. Hegel would reply that satisfaction is not the goal. Freedom is the goal. And freedom, the capacity to recognize oneself in social institutions, to live without alien domination, has expanded. A person born in 1820 had fewer choices, fewer rights, fewer opportunities than a person born today. That is not nothing. That is the substance of historical progress. Who is right? Perhaps both are right in different registers. Hegel sees the long arc. Schopenhauer sees the single life. Hegel sees the species. Schopenhauer sees the individual. Hegel sees what has been achieved. Schopenhauer sees what has been lost. These are not contradictory truths. They are complementary truths that pull against each other. 7. The legacy. Two philosophies for two moods. The empty lecture hall of 1820 has become a symbol not of Schopenhauer's defeat, but of the slowness of philosophical justice. Schopenhauer was not wrong to think that his time had not yet come, but he was wrong to think that Hegel's time would never come again. Both philosophers have proven durable. Both continue to be read, taught, and argued over. Schopenhauer's pessimism speaks to anyone who has looked at history and seen not progress, but recurrence. The same mistakes, the same cruelties, the same blind striving. For those moments, Schopenhauer offers not a solution, but a recognition. He names the feeling. He gives it dignity. And he offers a path, resignation, art, the denial of the will that some have found genuinely liberating. Hegel's optimism speaks to anyone who has looked at history and seen not repetition, but transformation. The same world that contained slavery also contained the movement to abolish it. The same species that killed millions in wars also produced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For those moments, Hegel offers not naive cheerfulness, but a philosophical justification for hope. He argues that the rationale is real, not yet fully, but in the process of becoming. The war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza, the climate crisis, these events pull us toward Schopenhauer. The expansion of democracy, the decline of global poverty, the spread of human rights norms, these events pull us toward Hegel. The truth is that both pulls are real. We live in the tension between them. Schopenhauer's famous insult, "Hegel is a mindless charlatan," was never fair. Hegel was neither mindless nor a charlatan. He was a philosopher of astonishing ambition and genuine insight. But Schopenhauer's resentment was not entirely misguided. He saw something that Hegel's system could not accommodate, the irreducible reality of individual suffering. And for that insight, he deserves his place in the history of philosophy, not as Hegel's victor, but as Hegel's necessary critic. The empty lecture hall reminds us that philosophy is not judged by contemporary popularity. It is judged by something slower and less certain, the gradual judgment of readers who return to old arguments because those arguments still feel alive. Hegel and Schopenhauer both passed that test. Their dispute is not over. It never will be, and that is precisely why it matters.